Hi, I'm the guy who opened his door to family because I thought blood meant loyalty. My in-laws smiled at Sunday dinners, praised the home I built with my own hands, then slid documents across my kitchen table demanding I sign it all over. They had lawyers, they had paperwork, they even had my wife nodding along like this was reasonable. They thought I was just a tradesman, too simple to understand contracts, too tired to fight back. But what they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I found something tucked inside their financial records, something they assumed I'd never see. So when they cornered me with their demands and their smug faces, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just reached into my folder and pulled out one document that turned their confidence into panic. And suddenly, the people demanding my house were the ones begging me not to file. Stick around. What happened next shattered their entire plan. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pulled into the gravel driveway just after 7 on a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet hour when the neighborhood settles into dinner routines and the streetlights flicker on one by one. The house stood exactly as I'd left it that morning, a 2-story Craftsman with dark blue siding and white trim, the porch light glowing warm against the deepening sky. I'd built most of it myself over 3 years, every joist and beam placed with my own hands, every nail driven with the kind of care you give something you plan to keep forever. The truck door slammed shut behind me, and I grabbed my thermos from the cup holder, still half full of cold coffee from the job site. I work commercial HVAC systems, the kind of work that keeps buildings running but nobody notices until something breaks. It's honest work, pays well, and I'm good at it. Good enough that I bought this land outright 5 years ago and started building the day after closing. Inside, the house smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. Abigail was in the kitchen, her back to me, stirring something on the stove. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and she wore that gray cardigan I bought her last Christmas. For a moment, everything felt normal. "Hey," I said, setting my keys on the counter. She turned, and that's when I saw it. The tightness around her mouth, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Something was wrong. "They're here," she said quietly. "Who?" "My parents. And Douglas." Douglas. Her older brother, the one who'd never held a job longer than 8 months, who'd borrowed money from us twice and paid back nothing. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "Why?" "They want to talk to you. It's important." I glanced past her into the dining room. Sure enough, Richard and Patricia Caldwell sat at my table like they owned it, Douglas leaning back in a chair with his arms crossed. 3 sets of eyes turned toward me when I walked in. "Matthew," Richard said, standing and extending a hand like we were business associates. I shook it because I was raised to be polite, even when my gut told me not to be. "Richard! Patricia!" I nodded to Douglas. He didn't nod back. "Sit down, son," Richard said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I didn't sit. I stayed standing near the doorway, arms loose at my sides. "What's this about?" Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "We've been talking, Matthew, as a family, about the future." "The future," I repeated. "Yes." Richard cleared his throat and pulled a folder from the leather bag beside his chair. He opened it slowly, deliberately, like a magician preparing a trick. Inside were documents, clean white pages with dense blocks of text and signature lines at the bottom. "We think it's time to consolidate assets," Richard said. "Make things more efficient. This house, it's a significant piece of property. Prime location, good bones." I stared at him. "You want to buy it?" "Not exactly." He slid the papers toward me. "We're proposing a transfer of ownership into a family trust for everyone's benefit." I picked up the top page, scanned the header. Quitclaim deed, transfer of title. My name listed as grantor. The Caldwell Family Trust listed as grantee. "You want me to sign over my house," I said slowly. "It's not like that," Patricia interjected. "It's still yours. You'd still live here. But legally, it protects everyone. If something happens to you, if there are debts or liabilities, the house is safe." "What debts?" I looked at Abigail, who was now standing in the kitchen doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "Abby, what is this?" She opened her mouth, but Richard spoke first. "It's just smart planning, Matthew. You work a dangerous job. Ladders, machinery, rooftops. God forbid something happens, but if it does, we need to make sure Abigail is taken care of, that the property stays in the family." Douglas finally spoke. his voice flat. "You're not exactly flush with cash, Moore. This protects you too." Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. I set the papers down on the table, smoothed them flat with my palm. "When did you come up with this?" "We've been discussing it for a few weeks," Patricia said. "It makes sense for everyone." "And you knew?" I looked at Abigail again. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I told them you'd understand," she said quietly. "Once you thought about it." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I needed a moment to think. 3 people sitting at my table, in the house I built, asking me to hand it over. And my wife, the woman I'd married 6 years ago, standing silent while they made their pitch. "I need to read this," I said, picking up the folder. "Of course," Richard said too quickly. "Take your time, we're not trying to pressure you." But the way Douglas leaned forward, the way Patricia's smile tightened, told me otherwise. They expected me to sign. Tonight. Right now. "I'll look it over," I said again. "Give me a few days." Richard's expression shifted, just slightly, impatience flickering beneath the polished exterior. "Matthew, we really need to move on this. The lawyer's only available this week, and there are filing deadlines." "Then I guess it'll have to wait," I said evenly. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. Douglas exhaled sharply through his nose. Patricia's fingers drummed once against the table. Richard closed his folder and stood. "We're trying to help you," he said, his tone colder now. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I met his eyes and held them. "I'm not making anything hard. I'm reading a legal document before I sign it. That's not unreasonable." He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his bag. "We'll be in touch." They filed out through the front door without another word. Douglas shot me a look on his way past, something between contempt and warning. The door clicked shut, and the house fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Abigail's breathing behind me. I stood there, holding the folder, staring at the empty chairs around my table, the table I'd built from reclaimed barn wood, the chairs I'd sanded and stained by hand. "You should have told me," I said without turning around. "I didn't know how," Abigail said softly. "They were so insistent. They said it was the right thing." "For who?" She didn't answer. I walked past her, down the hallway and into the small office I kept at the back of the house. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and turned on the lamp. Then I opened the folder and started reading. Every word, every clause, every line of fine print. And that's when I saw it, buried in the 3rd paragraph of page 4, a clause about debt assumption. If the property transferred into the trust, any existing liens, mortgages, or financial encumbrances would transfer with it. But I didn't have a mortgage. I'd paid cash for the land and built the house debt-free. So what liens were they talking about? I pulled out my laptop, logged into the county assessor's website, and searched my property by address. The page loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, my blood went cold. There, listed under liens and encumbrances, was a notice filed 3 months ago. Mechanics lien. Filed by Caldwell Property Solutions, LLC. Amount, $87,000. I stared at the screen, reading it twice, then a third time. Caldwell Property Solutions. Richard's company. A lien against my house for work I never authorized, for a contract I never signed. They hadn't come here to help me. They'd come to collect. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The sudden friendliness over the past few months. The invitations to family dinners. Patricia's interest in the house, asking about property values and improvements. It wasn't family bonding, it was reconnaissance. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the house creak and settle around me. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Abigail moving through the kitchen, washing dishes, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal. And it hadn't been for months. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a file I kept locked away. Inside were copies of every permit, every invoice, every receipt tied to this house. I'd kept them organized from day one, because that's how I was trained. Document everything. Protect yourself. And underneath those papers, in a sealed envelope, was something I'd found 6 months ago and hadn't told anyone about. Something I'd been holding on to, hoping I'd never need to use. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I opened the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. My hands were steady, my breathing was calm. Because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and they had no idea what I had waiting for them. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Abigail breathed softly beside me, her back turned, a canyon of silence stretching between us. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that lean notice, those numbers, Richard's too smooth smile across my dining room table. By 5 in the morning, I gave up. I slipped out of bed, pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, and went downstairs. The house was dark and cold, the kind of pre-dawn stillness that makes every footstep sound like an intrusion. I started coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue, and tried to piece together when everything had gone wrong. 6 months ago, things were different. Abigail and I were planning a vacation, talking about maybe getting a dog, normal future things. Her parents visited once a month, always polite, always just distant enough that I never felt like I truly belonged to their world. I was the HVAC guy who'd married their daughter. Respectable work, decent income, but not impressive. Not the lawyer or banker or corporate executive they'd probably hoped for. Then Richard started calling more often. Friendly calls, asking about the house, about projects I was working on. Did I need help with anything? Did I want recommendations for contractors? I'd brushed it off as him trying to connect, maybe feeling guilty for years of subtle disapproval. Now I understood. He'd been assessing value, measuring worth, planning. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured a cup, black, no sugar. I took it into my office and opened my laptop again. The county website was slow this early, but eventually it loaded. I pulled up the mechanic's lien filing and started tracing backwards. The lien had been filed on March 15th, 3 months ago. The claim stated that Caldwell Property Solutions had performed structural consultation and project management services on my property between January and March. Services I never requested, work that never happened. I clicked through to the supporting documents. There was a contract, supposedly signed by me, authorizing Richard's company to oversee renovations. The signature looked close to mine, but it wasn't. The loops were too tight, the baseline too straight. Someone had practiced, but not enough. My stomach turned. This wasn't just greed, this was fraud. Premeditated, carefully executed fraud. I printed everything. The lien notice, the forged contract, the filing timestamps. Then I opened my locked file cabinet and pulled out the real records. Every permit I'd filed for this house had my signature, my handwriting, my contractor license number. I'd done most of the work myself, hired licensed electricians and plumbers only when required by code. There was no room in the timeline for Richard's company to have done anything. I laid the papers side by side on my desk. The forgery, the truth. 2 versions of reality, and only one was real. The sun was fully up now, pale light filtering through the office blinds. I heard Abigail moving upstairs, the shower running, her routine beginning like any other day. But this wasn't any other day. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past family names, friends, co-workers, until I found the one I needed, Julian Reeves. We'd gone to trade school together 15 years ago, back when we were both just trying to figure out what kind of men we'd become. He'd gone into real estate law, I'd gone into HVAC, we still met for beers every few months, talked about life and work and everything in between. I typed out a message. Need to talk. Legal issue. Can you meet today? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. 11 a.m., my office. Everything okay? I stared at the question, then typed back. Not sure yet. See you at 11. Abigail came downstairs, dressed for work, her hair still damp, makeup carefully applied. She worked as a medical receptionist at a clinic across town. Steady hours, steady pay. We'd always split bills evenly, kept our finances separate except for joint expenses. It was her idea, something about maintaining independence. I'd agreed because it seemed fair. Now I wondered what else we'd kept separate, what else she'd hidden. You're up early, she said, pouring herself coffee. Couldn't sleep. She glanced at me, something uncertain flickering across her face. About last night? Yeah, Matthew, they're just trying to help. My dad's been in real estate for 30 years. He knows what he's doing. I set my mug down carefully. Did you know about the lien? Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. What lien? The one your father's company filed against this house. $87,000 for work that never happened. The color drained from her face. For a moment, I thought maybe she really didn't know. Maybe she was as much a victim as I was. But then her expression shifted, closed off, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Calculation. I don't know what you're talking about, she said quietly. It's public record, Abby, filed 3 months ago. Same time your parents started getting real interested in this place. You're being paranoid. Am I? I stood, walked to my office, and came back with the printed documents. I laid them on the counter between us. This is the lien. This is the forged contract with my signature. And this is the filing that shows your father's company behind it. She stared at the papers, her jaw tight. There has to be an explanation. There is. They're trying to steal my house. That's insane. Is it? I kept my voice level, calm. They show up with papers demanding I sign over the property. They pressure me to do it immediately. And when I look into it, I find out they've already positioned themselves to claim it's theirs. That's not help, Abby. That's a con. She grabbed her purse, hands shaking. I'm not doing this right now. I'm late for work. We need to talk about this. Later? She was already moving toward the door. We'll talk later. The door slammed shut, and I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the silence of the house I'd built. The house someone else wanted to take. I looked at the clock. 5 hours until my meeting with Julian. 5 hours to make sure I had everything I needed. I went back to my office and started pulling files. Not just the property records, but everything. Bank statements showing my cash purchase of the land. Receipts for every material I'd bought. Timestamps from my contractor license records showing when I'd filed for permits. Photographs I'd taken during construction, documenting every phase. And then I opened the bottom drawer one more time and pulled out that sealed envelope. The one I'd found 6 months ago tucked inside a folder Abigail had left on the kitchen table, the one she didn't know I'd seen. Inside was a letter from Patricia to Abigail, dated 8 months back. The handwriting was neat, controlled, every word chosen with care. Darling, once the property is secured, we can move forward with the investment opportunity your father mentioned. Douglas needs a fresh start, and this house could provide the capital. Matthew's a good man, but he lacks vision. Sometimes, we have to make hard choices for the people we love. Trust the process. I'd read that letter a dozen times since finding it. Each time, it cut a little deeper. My wife, her mother, her father, her brother. All of them planning, coordinating, deciding my future without me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I added it to my stack of documents. By 10:30, I had everything organized in a folder. I grabbed my keys, locked the house, and drove across town to Julian's office. The building was modest, a converted Victorian with a shingle hanging out front. Reeves and Associates, Real Estate Law. I climbed the steps and pushed through the door. Julian met me in the lobby, hand extended, concern already written on his face. Matt, come on back. His office was all dark wood and law books, the kind of place that felt solid and permanent. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat, setting my folder down carefully. So, he said, leaning back, what's going on? I told him everything. The surprise visit. The quitclaim deed. The mechanic's lien. The forged signature. The letter from Patricia. Julian listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for my folder. Can I see the documents? I slid them across the desk. He put on reading glasses and started going through them one by one, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. The silence stretched for 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, he looked up. This is fraud, he said flatly. Clear, documented fraud. The forged signature alone is a criminal offense. Add in the false lien, and they're looking at serious penalties. Can they take my house? Not legally. But they can make your life hell trying. Liens like this cloud the title. You can't sell, can't refinance, can't do anything until it's cleared. And clearing it requires either payment or a court order. How long does that take? Months, maybe a year, depends on how hard they fight. I sat back, feeling the weight of it settle over me. A year of my life, my home, my marriage, all tangled in legal warfare because my in-laws decided I was an easy mark. "There's something else," Julian said carefully. "Something I need to show you." He turned his computer screen toward me and pulled up a website. Public Records Database. He typed in Richard Caldwell's name and hit search. A list of filings appeared. Liens, judgments, court cases. Dozens of them. "Your father-in-law has a history," Julian said. "He's filed mechanics liens against at least 8 properties in the last 5 years. 3 of them resulted in foreclosure sales. He buys properties cheap, flips them, makes a profit. It's his business model. He's done this before. Multiple times, and he's good at it. Targets people who won't fight back, people who trust him." I stared at the screen, at the names of strangers who'd lost their homes to the man who smiled across my dinner table and called me son. "What do I do?" I asked. Julian closed his laptop and leaned forward. "You fight, hard. I'll file a motion to remove the lien, but we'll need to prove fraud. That means depositions, court appearances, possibly criminal charges. It's gonna get ugly." "They're family." "They stopped being family the moment they forged your signature." I nodded slowly. He was right. I knew he was right, but knowing it and feeling it were 2 different things. "There's one more thing," I said. "Something they don't know I have." Julian raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not the letter from Patricia, something else. Something I'd found 3 weeks ago when I'd gone to the county clerk's office to file a permit extension. I'd been standing at the counter when I overheard 2 clerks talking. One of them mentioned the Caldwell name, said something about another lien filing. I'd asked casually what they meant, and the clerk, not knowing who I was, had pulled up the record. It was a foreclosure notice, not against my property, against Richard Caldwell's own home. He was 3 months behind on his mortgage. The bank had initiated proceedings. He was about to lose everything. That's when I understood. This wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Richard needed my house because he was losing his own. And he'd dragged his family into a criminal conspiracy to save himself. I unfolded the paper and handed it to Julian. He read it, his eyes widening. "He's in foreclosure. Filed 6 weeks ago. Public record." Julian sat back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They came after you because they're drowning, and now you have leverage." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that ends this before it starts. We go to them with what we know. The fraud, the forgery, and this." He tapped the foreclosure notice. "We offer them a choice. Drop the lien, walk away clean, or we file criminal charges and make sure everyone knows Richard Caldwell is a con artist who preys on his own family." I looked at the notice, at Richard's name printed in official typeface, at the words default and foreclosure stamped across the top. For 6 months I'd carried the weight of their manipulation. 6 months of watching my wife pull away, of feeling like a stranger in my own home, of wondering if I was crazy for thinking something was wrong. I wasn't crazy. And I wasn't going to be their victim. "Set up a meeting," I said. "All of them, let's finish this." Julian scheduled the meeting for Friday afternoon at his office. Neutral ground, professional setting, the kind of place where people couldn't make a scene without consequences. He sent formal letters to Richard, Patricia, and Douglas, laying out the agenda in careful legal language. Response to mechanics lien filing. Discussion of property dispute. Mandatory attendance. I didn't tell Abigail, not directly, but she knew something was happening. The letter arrived at our house on Wednesday, addressed to her parents but CC'd to her. I watched her open it at the kitchen table, saw her face go pale as she read. "You're suing my family?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm defending my property," I said. "There's a difference. This is going to destroy everything." "It already is destroyed, Abby. They did that when they forged my signature." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. "You don't understand. My dad is under a lot of pressure right now. Business has been hard. He made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. This is fraud. You're going to send my father to jail over a misunderstanding?" I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to find the woman I'd married somewhere behind those eyes. "Did you know? When they filed that lien, did you know what they were doing?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed her purse and left. That night I stayed in the guest room, not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't stand lying next to someone who'd chosen her family's lies over our marriage. The bed was smaller, the mattress harder, but I slept better than I had in weeks. Sometimes clarity is more comfortable than denial. Friday came slow and heavy, each hour dragging like feet through mud. I took the day off work, told my supervisor I had a legal appointment. He didn't ask questions. Good bosses don't. I dressed carefully. Dark jeans, button-down shirt, work boots polished clean. I wasn't trying to look like someone I wasn't, but I wanted them to see that I took this seriously, that I wasn't the pushover they'd assumed. Julian's office was quiet when I arrived at 2 o'clock. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, told me everyone was already in the conference room. I nodded, took a breath, and followed her down the hall. The conference room had a long wooden table, high-back chairs, and windows that looked out over a small parking lot. Richard sat at the far end, Douglas beside him, both in suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment back when I had one. Patricia sat across from them, hands folded on the table, her expression carved from ice. And Abigail. She sat next to her mother, eyes red, tissue clutched in one hand. She looked at me when I walked in, and I saw something there. Not anger, not defiance, just exhaustion. Julian stood at the head of the table, a stack of folders in front of him. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice professional and controlled. "Let's get started." Richard cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to say that this whole situation is a misunderstanding. We're family. We should be able to work this out without lawyers." "That would have been nice," Julian said evenly, "but you filed a fraudulent lien against my client's property. That moved this beyond family dinners and into the legal system." "Fraudulent is a strong word," Patricia said sharply. "It's also an accurate one." Julian opened the first folder and slid copies of documents across the table. "This is the mechanics lien your husband's company filed. And this is the contract you claim authorizes that lien. Notice the signature." Richard picked up the paper, barely glancing at it. "That's Matthew's signature." "No," I said quietly, "it's not." Julian laid another document on the table. "This is a contract Matthew actually signed. Building permit application from 2 years ago. Notice the differences. The pressure points, the letter formation, the baseline consistency. I had a forensic document examiner analyze both. His report confirms the lien contract signature is a forgery." The room went silent. Patricia's hands tightened on the table. Douglas shifted in his chair. Richard's face remained carefully neutral, but I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. "You had us analyzed?" Patricia's voice was dangerously soft. "I had evidence examined," Julian corrected. "Evidence of a crime." "This is ridiculous," Douglas said. "You're accusing us of forgery over a business dispute?" "I'm not accusing," Julian said. "I'm stating facts. Your father forged Matthew's signature to create a false debt, then pressured him to sign over his property to satisfy that debt. That's not a business dispute. That's fraud." Richard finally spoke, his voice measured. "We were trying to help. The housing market is volatile. Matthew's property is valuable but unprotected. We offered to place it in a trust for his benefit, while simultaneously claiming he owed you $87,000 for work you never performed," Julian said. "Convenient timing." "The work was consultation," Richard said smoothly. "Project management, advisory services. Show me the timesheets. Show me the invoices. Show me any documentation that proves you performed any services whatsoever." Richard hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Julian saw it. I saw it. Everyone in that room saw it. "We didn't keep detailed records," Patricia said quickly. "It was family helping family. We didn't think we needed paperwork." "You needed it enough to file a legal lien," Julian said, "but not enough to document the work that justified it. Interesting." I watched them scramble, watched their story crack and shift, trying to find solid ground, and I realized something. They'd done this before, but never to someone who fought back, never to someone who knew how to build a case as carefully as they'd built their lies. Julian wasn't done. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Let's talk about history. Richard, your company has filed mechanics liens against 8 properties in the past 5 years. 3 resulted in foreclosure sales where you or your associates purchased the property at auction. You have a pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners, filing false liens, and profiting from their desperation. Those were legitimate business dealings, Richard said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. Were they? Because I spoke with 2 of those homeowners. They're willing to testify that you used the exact same playbook. Forged signatures, false invoices, pressure tactics. One of them still has the threatening letters you sent. Patricia stood abruptly. This is slander. We're leaving. Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell. Julian's voice cut through the room like a blade. You're not leaving until you hear everything. She sat slowly. Her hands were shaking now. Julian slid one more document across the table. I knew what it was before anyone else picked it up. The foreclosure notice. Richard's house. His own desperation made public. You're 3 months behind on your mortgage, Julian said. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. You're about to lose your home. That's why you targeted Matthew. Not to help him, to save yourself. Richard's face went gray. Patricia's hands flew to her mouth. Douglas stared at his father like seeing him for the first time. You were going to steal my house to pay your mortgage, I said, my voice steady. You were going to destroy my life to fix yours. Richard's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. Abigail was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Dad? Her voice broke. Is that true? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was laid out on the table in black and white, signed and notarized and undeniable. Julian leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to file a full release of the mechanics lien within 48 hours. You're going to sign an affidavit admitting the contract was falsified and that no services were performed. And you're going to stay away from Matthew, his property, and anything connected to him for the rest of your lives. And if we don't? Douglas asked, his voice thin. Then I file criminal charges. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. You'll be arrested, prosecuted, and if convicted, you'll serve time. Your business will be destroyed. Your reputation will be destroyed. And everyone will know that Richard Caldwell is a con artist who preys on his own family. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice barely audible. What about my house? Julian's expression didn't change. That's not Matthew's problem. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Richard looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something crumble behind his eyes. The authority, the control, the certainty that he could manipulate his way out of anything. It was gone. I need time, he said. You have 48 hours, Julian repeated. After that, I file. Patricia stood again, slower this time. Come on, Richard, we're going. They filed out like mourners leaving a funeral. Douglas didn't look at anyone. Richard moved like a man in a dream. Patricia held her head high, but her hands were still shaking. Abigail stayed seated, staring at the table. Abby, I said softly. She looked up at me, and her eyes were hollow. I didn't know about the foreclosure, about any of it. I thought they were just trying to help. But you knew about the lien. She nodded, tears falling faster now. My mom told me it was standard procedure, that it was just protecting everyone's interests. I didn't understand what it really meant. You chose them over me. They're my family. So was I. She flinched like I'd struck her. Was? I looked at her for a long moment, at the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who'd stood by while her family tried to destroy me. I don't know anymore, I said finally. I really don't know. I stood and walked out of the conference room. Julian followed, closing the door behind us. That went better than expected, he said quietly. Did it? They'll fold. Richard's too scared of prison, and Patricia won't risk the scandal. You'll have your release by Monday. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home, you wait, and you decide what kind of life you want to build next. I drove home in silence, the sun setting orange and red behind the hills. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Abigail's car was gone. I didn't know if she'd come back tonight or ever. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. The coffee cup in the sink, the papers on my desk, the silence pressing in from every corner. I walked through each room slowly, touching walls I'd built, floors I'd laid, fixtures I'd installed. This house was mine, every inch of it. No one could take that away. But standing there alone, I realized something. A house isn't a home without someone to share it with, and maybe that was the real loss, not the property, not the money. But the future I'd imagined, the life I'd thought we were building, that was gone, and no legal victory could bring it back. I sat on the couch as darkness filled the windows, and I let myself feel it, all of it, the betrayal, the anger, the grief. I let it wash over me and through me, and when it passed, what remained was something harder and colder. Clarity. They'd tried to take everything, and I'd stopped them, but the cost was higher than any dollar amount, any legal settlement. The cost was trust, and that, I knew, was something I'd never get back. The release came through on Sunday morning, not Monday. 40 hours after the meeting, not 48. That told me everything I needed to know about how scared they really were. Julian called at 8:30 while I was drinking coffee on the back porch, watching morning fog roll across the distant tree line. "It's done," he said. "Full release of lien, signed affidavit, notarized and filed. Your title is clear." That was fast. Fear is a powerful motivator. Richard knows I wasn't bluffing about the criminal charges. He folded before I even had to push. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat with the silence. Victory should have felt different, bigger. But all I felt was empty, like finishing a meal that left you hungry. Abigail hadn't come home Friday night, or Saturday. Her car had appeared in the driveway around midnight Sunday, but she'd gone straight to the bedroom without a word. I heard her moving around up there now, drawers opening and closing, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. I went inside, climbed the stairs, and stood in the doorway of our bedroom. She had 2 suitcases open on the bed, half filled with clothes. "You're leaving," I said, not a question. She didn't look up. "I'm staying with my sister for a while. I need space to think." "About what?" "About everything." She folded a sweater with precise, angry movements. "About whether I can stay married to someone who sued my family." "I didn't sue them. I defended myself." "You humiliated them. You humiliated me." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "They forged my signature, Abby. They tried to steal my house, our house. And you're angry at me?" "You didn't have to go nuclear. You could have talked to them." I tried talking. "They came to our table with legal documents demanding I sign over my property. That's not a conversation, that's a threat." She finally looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "My father is losing everything, his business, his house, his reputation, and you just made it worse." "I didn't make him forge documents. I didn't make him file false liens. He did that. Those are his choices, his consequences. He was desperate." "So that makes it okay?" My voice stayed level, but something cold was settling into my chest. "Desperation justifies fraud? Justifies betrayal?" She zipped the suitcase with violent force. "You don't understand what it's like. You don't have family expectations, family pressure. You've always just done whatever you wanted. I built a life. I built this house. I thought I was building a future with you." "Well, maybe you should have asked me what I wanted that future to look like." The words hung between us like smoke. I studied her face, looking for some sign of the woman I'd married, the one who used to laugh at my terrible jokes, who'd spent Sunday mornings reading beside me in comfortable silence, who'd once told me I made her feel safe. That woman wasn't here anymore. Maybe she never had been. "What do you want, Abby?" She grabbed the second suitcase, wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know, but I know I can't be here right now." She pushed past me into the hallway, dragging both suitcases behind her. I followed her down the stairs, watched her struggle with the bags in her purse and her car keys. She didn't ask for help. I didn't offer. At the door, she paused. "I'll call you in a few days, when I've had time to think. Take all the time you need." She flinched at that, like maybe she'd expected me to beg her to stay. But I was done begging, done explaining, done defending my right to protect what was mine. The door closed behind her, her car started, gravel crunched under tires. Then, silence. I stood in the entryway of my house, my empty house, and waited for something to break inside me. Grief, anger, regret, anything. But what came instead was clarity, sharp and cold as winter air. I'd spent 6 years trying to be enough. Enough for her family, enough for her. trying to prove that a tradesman could build something worth keeping, that someone without a college degree or a corner office could still provide a good life. I'd poured everything into this house, into our marriage, into the idea that love and effort could overcome any obstacle. But you can't build a foundation on lies, and you can't make someone choose you when they've already chosen someone else. I walked back to my office and opened my laptop. Time to see exactly what I was dealing with. Over the next 3 hours, I compiled everything, not just about the lien and the forgery, but about the Caldwells as a whole, their business history, their financial situation, every public record I could access. Richard's company, Caldwell Property Solutions, had been incorporated 12 years ago. For the first 5 years, it did steady business, small renovations and property flips, nothing spectacular, but profitable enough. Then, something changed. 7 years ago, the filing shifted. Bigger projects, bigger loans, partnerships with investors whose names appeared and disappeared from documents within months. The pattern repeated every year. New investors, new debt, old investors quietly removed from paperwork. I cross-referenced the timeline with county records. That's when the mechanics liens started appearing. Small ones at first, 10 or 20,000 against properties in older neighborhoods. Properties owned by elderly people, recent divorcees, anyone who looked vulnerable, anyone who might settle rather than fight. 3 of those properties ended up in foreclosure. All 3 were purchased at auction by shell companies. And when I traced those shell companies through business filings and tax records, they all led back to the same registered agent, Patricia Caldwell. They'd been running this scheme for years, building fake debt, forcing foreclosure, buying properties cheap, flipping them for profit. A family business built on preying on people who trusted them. I sat back from the computer, feeling sick. These weren't desperate people making bad choices. These were predators with a system, refined over years, polished until it looked legitimate enough that most people never questioned it. I'd just been the latest mark. Except I'd had something they didn't expect: knowledge, resources, and a stubborn refusal to roll over. My phone buzzed, a text from Julian. "Thought you should know. Richard filed for bankruptcy this morning. Chapter 7, full liquidation." I stared at the message. Bankruptcy meant his assets would be sold off to pay creditors. His house, his business, everything. The foreclosure I'd discovered was just the beginning. He'd been drowning for months, maybe longer. Another text came through. Patricia is listed as a creditor. She loaned the company over $200,000 in the past year. She'll lose it all. So Patricia had poured their personal savings into Richard's failing business, trying to keep it afloat. And when that wasn't enough, they'd come after me. Not as a first choice, as a last resort. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it explained the desperation, the sloppiness of the forgery, the rushed timeline. They weren't master criminals. They were drowning people grabbing at anything that floated. Part of me, a small part, felt something almost like pity, but then I remembered Patricia's letter to Abigail. He lacks vision. I remembered Richard's smooth lies across my dinner table. I remembered Douglas's contempt, the way he'd looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. Whatever pity I felt evaporated like morning dew. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. That's how the world worked. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine: work during the day, research at night. I documented everything I'd learned about the Caldwells, not because I planned to use it, but because knowledge was armor. The more I understood about how they operated, the better I could protect myself if they tried again. But they didn't try again. The calls stopped. The texts stopped. Even Abigail went silent after her initial promise to, quote, in a few days. A week passed, then 2. I changed the locks. Not out of spite, but out of practicality. This was my house, and I needed to know who had access to it. I updated my will, removing Abigail as beneficiary and executor. I changed my banking passwords, my email passwords, every digital lock I could think of. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I went through Abigail's things. Not to invade her privacy, I told myself. Just to see what she'd left behind, what she'd taken, what might need to be returned. But as I sorted through drawers and closet shelves, I found myself looking for answers. Evidence. Some explanation for how we'd ended up here. In the back of her nightstand drawer, tucked under a stack of old magazines, I found a folder. Inside were bank statements for an account I didn't recognize. An account in her name only, opened 3 years ago. I flipped through the statements. Regular deposits, always in cash, no clear source. Withdrawals that matched dates I remembered. Her work bonuses that seemed to come at convenient times. Her overtime pay that never quite showed up on her tax returns. The most recent statement showed a balance of $43,000. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the papers, trying to make sense of it. We'd always split bills evenly. We'd always maintained separate finances. But she'd never mentioned this account, never told me she was building savings. Why would she hide it unless she'd been planning to leave all along? The thought settled into my gut like a stone. Maybe the lien scheme hadn't been her parents' idea. Maybe it had been hers. Maybe she'd been waiting for the right moment to walk away with half of everything, plus her secret nest egg, leaving me with nothing but debt and legal problems. Or maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the account was innocent, just her way of maintaining independence like she'd always said she wanted. I didn't know. And I realized, sitting there in the growing darkness of our bedroom, that I didn't know my wife at all. Maybe I never had. I put the statements back, closed the drawer, and walked downstairs. The house felt bigger than it used to, emptier, like it was expanding to fill the space where a marriage used to be. In the kitchen, I poured myself a bourbon. Not to get drunk, just to have something warm in my hands. I stood at the window watching the sun set behind the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Matthew Moore? A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Sandra Kellerman. I'm a real estate attorney representing the estate of Margaret Chen. I understand you had dealings with Caldwell Property Solutions. My hand tightened on the phone. I did. Why? Mrs. Chen was one of my clients. She lost her home to a fraudulent mechanics lien filed by Richard Caldwell 2 years ago. She passed away last month, but before she died, she asked me to investigate. She wanted to make sure no one else went through what she did. I set my glass down carefully. I'm listening. I've been building a case. Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. But I need witnesses. People who can testify about Caldwell's methods, his tactics. Your attorney, Mr. Reeves, suggested you might be willing to help. What are you asking? Testify. Tell your story in court. Help me make sure Richard Caldwell never does this to anyone else. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Margaret Chen, an elderly woman who'd lost her home, who'd died knowing she'd been cheated but unable to get justice. Thinking about how many others there might be. How many people who hadn't fought back, who hadn't known how. I'll do it, I said. Thank you. I'll be in touch with details. She hung up. I stood there holding the phone, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It wasn't just about my marriage or my in-laws or my wounded pride. It was about making sure that when someone got knocked down, they had the tools to get back up. About making sure predators faced consequences. About turning pain into purpose. I finished my bourbon and went to my office. I had files to organize, testimony to prepare, a case to build. The house might be empty, my marriage might be over. But I wasn't done fighting. Not even close. The first time I met the Caldwells was 3 months before Abigail and I got married. We'd been dating for 2 years, living together for 1, and I'd somehow managed to avoid meeting her parents through a combination of their busy schedules and what I now recognized as Abigail's strategic delays. They're particular, she'd told me over dinner one night. They have expectations. About what? About everything. Where I work, who I date, what kind of life I'm building. She'd smiled, but it hadn't reached her eyes. Just be yourself, that'll be enough. It wasn't enough. I knew that within 5 minutes of shaking Richard's hand. We'd met at a steakhouse downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and wine lists thick as phone books. I'd worn my best shirt, the navy one Abigail said brought out my eyes, and I'd practiced small talk in my head during the entire drive over. Richard was tall, silver-haired, handsome in that way wealthy men often are, more polished than genetics. Patricia was elegant, perfectly composed, the kind of woman who'd never been caught off guard in her life. Douglas had shown up late, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without looking at the price, and spent most of dinner on his phone. So, Matthew, Richard had said after the waiter took our orders, Abigail tells us you work in HVAC. Yes, sir. Commercial systems mostly. Office buildings, hospitals, that kind of thing. Honest work. The way he said it made it sound like an insult wrapped in compliment paper. It pays well, I'd said, and I'm good at it. I'm sure you are. Patricia had smiled that thin smile. Do you have plans to advance? Management, perhaps? Or are you content with the technical side? I like building things, fixing things, making systems work better than they did before. How admirable, she'd sipped her wine. Abigail was always drawn to practical men. Her last boyfriend was an engineer. The comparison hung in the air like cigarette smoke. I'd glanced at Abigail, who was studying her salad like it held the secrets of the universe. The dinner had continued like that, a series of polite questions that felt like job interview traps. What were my long-term career goals? Did I have savings, investments? Had I considered going back to school? I'd answered honestly, too honestly probably, and watched their expressions grow more distant with each reply. No college degree. No investment portfolio. No plans to climb any corporate ladders. By the time dessert arrived, I could feel the rejection radiating across the table like heat from asphalt in summer. Well, Richard had said as we stood to leave, it was good to finally meet you, Matthew. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. But his tone said the opposite. His tone said, I hope my daughter comes to her senses. In the car on the way home, Abigail had been quiet. That bad? I'd finally asked. They just need time to get to know you. They've already decided I'm not good enough. Don't say that. It's true though, isn't it? She'd reached over and taken my hand. I don't care what they think. I love you. That's what matters. I'd believed her. God help me, I'd believed her. The wedding was small, immediate family only. Richard had offered to pay, but I'd insisted on handling it myself. Pride, probably, but also instinct. Even then, some part of me knew not to owe them anything. Abigail had been beautiful, radiant in a simple white dress, smiling like she meant it. I'd watched her walk down the aisle and thought I was the luckiest man alive. Richard's toast at the reception had been short. To Matthew and Abigail, may they build a life worthy of the love they share. Everyone had clapped. I'd smiled and nodded, but I'd caught the edge in his voice, the emphasis on worthy, like it was a challenge I'd already failed. The first year of marriage was good. Better than good. We worked, we laughed, we planned. I'd started saving for the land, dreaming about building our own place, something permanent. Abigail had encouraged it, helped me sketch floor plans, picked out paint colors from sample cards. I want space, she'd said, room to breathe. Not some cramped apartment where I can hear the neighbors through the walls. So I'd worked overtime, picked up side jobs, saved every dollar I could. And when I finally had enough for a down payment on 3 acres outside town, I'd taken her to see it on a Sunday morning in spring. The land had been perfect. Gentle slope, mature trees, a view of distant mountains. I'd stood there with my arm around her waist and described exactly where the house would sit, where the driveway would curve, where we'd plant a garden. It's perfect, she'd whispered. Let's do it. I'd bought it that week. Cash offer, no contingencies. The seller's attorney said he'd never seen someone my age buy land outright. I'd told him I believed in owning things free and clear, in building from a solid foundation. Funny how those words echo differently now. The Caldwells had visited the land once during construction. Richard had walked the perimeter, hands in his pockets, nodding occasionally. Patricia had stayed in the car, claiming the ground was too uneven for her shoes. You're doing this yourself, Richard had asked, watching me frame a wall. Most of it. I'll bring in licensed contractors for electrical and plumbing, but the rest I can handle. Ambitious. He'd run his hand along a beam. You know, my company could help. Project management, consulting, make sure everything's up to code. I appreciate it, but I've got it covered. Something had flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. The offer stands. Family discount. I'd thanked him and gone back to work. He'd left shortly after. Looking back, I wondered if that was when the plan started forming. When he'd realized I had something worth taking, something built with cash and sweat and careful planning, something that could solve his problems if he could just figure out how to make it his. The house took 3 years to complete. 3 years of weekends and evenings, of sore muscles and small victories. Abigail had been there for most of it, bringing lunch, painting walls, picking out fixtures. We'd moved in on a Saturday in October, exhausted and happy, ordering pizza and eating it on the floor because we didn't have furniture yet. "We did it," she'd said, leaning against my shoulder. "We actually did it. We did." That night, sleeping on an air mattress in our empty bedroom, I'd felt complete, like I'd finally proven something. Not to her parents, but to myself. That I could build something lasting, something real. But maybe I'd been building on sand all along. Maybe the foundation had cracks I couldn't see, weaknesses that would spread and deepen until everything collapsed. 6 months after we moved in, Richard had started calling more often. "Just checking in," he'd say, "seeing how things were going. Did I need help with anything? Had I thought about property insurance? What about estate planning?" I'd answered his questions politely, kept conversations short, but each call felt like he was measuring something, calculating angles I couldn't see. Then the pandemic hit. Work slowed. Money got tight. Not desperate, but tighter than I liked. Abigail had mentioned it to her mother during one of their weekly calls. The next day, Richard had called with an offer. "A loan," he'd said. "Family helping family. No interest, flexible repayment. Just to tide us over until things picked up." I'd said no. Told him we were fine, we'd manage. Thanked him for the offer. A week later, the first mechanics lien inquiry appeared. Just a form letter from the county, asking me to verify work performed by Caldwell Property Solutions. I'd assumed it was a mistake, filed it away. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of small moves, careful positioning, a trap being built around me so slowly I never felt the walls closing in. Now, sitting in my office with years of memories laid out like evidence, I could see the pattern clearly. The initial rejection, the strategic distance. The sudden interest once I had something valuable. The loan offer designed to create obligation, the lien filed when I refused to take the bait. They'd been patient, methodical, playing a long game while I'd thought we were just being family. My phone buzzed, a text from Abigail. "We need to talk. Can I come by tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep the door closed and move forward alone. But another part, the part that still remembered loving her, that still wanted to believe some part of our marriage had been real, needed to hear what she had to say. I typed back. "Tomorrow at 6, just you." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Okay. I set the phone down and looked around my office. At the files, the documents, the paper trail of betrayal. Tomorrow I'd hear her side. Tomorrow I'd decide if there was anything left worth saving. But tonight I just sat in the quiet of my house and let myself remember. Not the lies or the schemes, but the moments that had felt true. The morning she'd brought me coffee at the job site. The night we'd danced in the kitchen to no music. The way she used to curl against me in sleep, trusting and warm. Those moments had been real once. Or maybe they hadn't. Maybe I'd built them the same way I'd built this house, with hope and effort and the belief that care could create permanence. Either way, they were gone now. All I had left were the walls and the floor and the roof overhead. The structure remained. But everything that made it a home had walked out the door with a suitcase in each hand. And tomorrow I'd find out if there was any way to rebuild what we'd lost, or if I'd be standing in these empty rooms alone for the rest of my life. Abigail arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. I watched from the kitchen window as she parked, sat in her car for a full minute, then finally stepped out. She looked thinner, tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well either. I opened the door before she could knock. We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure how to start. "Come in," I said finally. She stepped inside, glancing around like she was seeing the place for the first time. Her eyes lingered on the bare spots where her things used to be, the empty hooks by the door, the missing photos from the mantel. "You've been busy," she said quietly. "Just organizing, making space." We moved to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. I took the chair across from her, keeping distance between us. "I've been thinking a lot," she started, "about everything that happened, about us." "And?" "I was wrong, about defending them, about blaming you. My father did something illegal, something horrible, and I tried to make it your fault for catching him." I nodded slowly. Why did you do it? Because it was easier than admitting my family isn't who I thought they were. My whole life, my dad was this successful businessman, someone people respected. Finding out he's a fraud, that he's been hurting people for years, it broke something in me. So you broke us instead. She flinched. I didn't know what else to do. They're my parents, Matthew, my family. I couldn't just abandon them. But you could abandon me. Tears welled in her eyes. That's not fair. Isn't it? They tried to steal my house, Abby. Our house. They forged my name, filed false documents, and you stood there and watched. You knew something was wrong, and you said nothing. I thought it was just business stuff, complicated legal things I didn't understand. You understood enough to hide it from me. You understood enough to let them keep pushing. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I am. That I made a mistake? I did. But I can't change it now. No, you can't. Silence settled between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Normal sounds from a normal evening, except nothing about this was normal anymore. I want to come home, she said finally. I want to try to fix this. I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for something to hold on to, some reason to believe we could recover from this. But all I saw was exhaustion and obligation, not love. I don't think we can fix this, Abby. Don't say that, please. We've been together 8 years. That has to mean something. It did mean something. Past tense. She stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. So that's it? You're just giving up? I'm not giving up. I'm recognizing what's already gone. Because I made one mistake. Because you chose them over me. Because when it mattered, when I needed you to stand with me, you stood with the people trying to destroy me. That's not one mistake. That's who you are. Her face crumpled. That's cruel. It's honest. She grabbed her purse, hands shaking. Fine. If that's how you feel, then I'll get a lawyer. We'll split everything 50-50 and be done with it. The house is mine, bought with my money, built with my hands. You're not entitled to half. We'll see what a judge says. She walked to the door, yanked it open, then paused. You know what your problem is, Matthew? You think being right makes you better than everyone else, but it just makes you alone. The door slammed. Her car started. Gravel scattered under spinning tires. I sat in the empty living room as darkness filled the windows, her words echoing in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe being right did make me alone. But at least I still had my house. At least I still had my name on the deed, my foundation under my feet, my walls around me. And sometimes, that had to be enough. Sandra Kellerman's office was downtown, 3rd floor of a renovated brick building that still had the original wood floors and high ceilings. I arrived on a Thursday morning, carrying a folder thick with documents, ready to do what needed to be done. She met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Moore, thank you for coming. Her office was organized chaos, files stacked on every surface, a whiteboard covered in timelines and case notes. She cleared a chair for me and sat behind her desk. I've been investigating the Caldwells for 6 months, she said. Your case is the freshest, which makes it the strongest. Fraud is easier to prove when the evidence is recent. What do you need from me? Everything. Timeline, documents, testimony. I want to know every interaction, every red flag, every moment you suspected something was wrong. I opened my folder and started talking. She took notes, asked questions, made connections I hadn't seen. By the time I finished, 2 hours had passed. This is solid, she said, really solid. With your testimony and the documentation you've provided, I can build a criminal case that goes beyond civil fraud. Conspiracy, racketeering, possibly even identity theft. How many others were there? That I can prove? 5 families. But I suspect more. People who settled quietly, who didn't understand they'd been conned. What happens to them? If we win, they might be able to reopen their cases, sue for damages. It won't give them back what they lost, but it's something. I thought about Margaret Chen, dying without justice, about the others who'd lost homes, savings, futures, because they'd trusted the wrong people. When do we start? Sandra smiled. We already have. I filed charges this morning. Richard and Patricia Caldwell will be arrested within 48 hours. Something settled in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but purpose. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger than my house, my marriage, my wounded pride. What do you need me to do? Be ready to testify, be prepared for them to fight back, and most importantly, don't let them intimidate you into backing down. I stood, shook her hand. I won't. Walking out into the afternoon sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fight wasn't over, but at least now I wasn't fighting alone. And sometimes that makes all the difference. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a conference room with wooden benches and fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. I sat in the second row behind Sandra Kellerman, watching as Richard and Patricia Caldwell entered through the side door with their attorney. Richard looked diminished somehow, his expensive suit hanging looser than it should, his silver hair less polished. Patricia kept her chin up, but her hands trembled as she clutched her purse. Douglas wasn't there. Sandra had told me he'd taken a plea deal, agreed to testify against his parents in exchange for reduced charges. The judge entered, an older woman with reading glasses and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book twice. Everyone stood, then sat. The bailiff called the case number. The State versus Richard James Caldwell and Patricia Ann Caldwell, charges of fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and filing false liens. Sandra stood, her voice clear and professional. Your Honor, the State is prepared to present evidence of a systematic scheme to defraud multiple homeowners over a period of 5 years. We have documentation, witness testimony, and financial records proving the defendants engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior designed to illegally obtain property through fraudulent mechanics liens. The defense attorney, a tired-looking man in his 60s, stood next. Your Honor, my clients maintain their innocence. These were legitimate business transactions that have been mischaracterized by overzealous prosecution. The judge nodded once. Let's hear the evidence. Sandra called her first witness, a forensic document examiner who explained how he'd analyzed the signatures on the mechanics lien contracts. He displayed side-by-side comparisons on a screen, pointing out the differences between my real signature and the forgery. The loops, the pressure points, the inconsistent baseline. It was technical, detailed, damning. The defense attorney tried to suggest the differences were minor, that signatures naturally vary. The examiner shut that down immediately. These aren't natural variations. These are deliberate attempts to replicate someone else's handwriting. Next came a county clerk who'd processed several of Richard's lien filings. She testified about how he'd always come in right before closing, how he'd been friendly and professional, how she'd never thought to question the paperwork because it looked legitimate. Did you ever verify the signatures with the property owners? Sandra asked. No, that's not standard procedure. We assume the documents are authentic. So anyone could file a fraudulent lien and you'd process it. Objection, the defense attorney said. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. Rephrase, counselor. Sandra nodded. Is there any safeguard in place to prevent someone from filing a false lien against property they have no legitimate claim to? The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Not really. We rely on the integrity of the filers. Then it was my turn. Sandra called me to the stand. I swore to tell the truth, sat down and looked at the Caldwells. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. Patricia stared straight ahead like I didn't exist. Sandra walked me through everything. Meeting the family, building the house, the surprise visit with the quitclaim deed, discovering the lien, finding the foreclosure notice. I kept my voice steady, factual, no emotion bleeding through. Just the facts. Mr. Moore, did you ever authorize Richard Caldwell or his company to perform any work on your property? No. Did you ever sign a contract with Caldwell Property Solutions? No. Did you owe Richard Caldwell any money? No. The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd agreed to some kind of informal arrangement, that maybe I'd forgotten signing something, that family dynamics were complicated and perhaps there'd been misunderstandings. I answered every question the same way, clear, direct, truthful. Isn't it true that you've had financial difficulties in the past year? My income fluctuated during the pandemic, but I've never missed a payment on any obligation. Isn't it possible you agreed to let Mr. Caldwell help you and simply don't remember? No, I remember every conversation I had with Richard Caldwell. None of them involved hiring his company. When I stepped down, Sandra called Douglas. He looked miserable walking to the stand, wouldn't look at his parents. His testimony was quiet but devastating. My father told me the plan 6 months before they executed it. He said Matthew had built equity they could leverage. That if they filed a lien and pressured him to sign over the property to resolve the debt, they could flip it and make enough to save Dad's business. And you agreed to help? I didn't think it through. I just did what my father asked. Did your father forge Matthew Moore's signature? Douglas hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I watched him practice it for weeks. Patricia made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Richard's jaw clenched. The trial lasted 2 days. On the second afternoon, after closing arguments and deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Richard closed his eyes. Patricia wept quietly. Their attorney patted her shoulder but said nothing. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks out, then dismissed the court. As everyone stood to leave, Richard finally looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, no defiance, just exhaustion and something that might have been regret. I didn't look away. I held his gaze until he turned and walked out between 2 court officers. Outside, Sandra shook my hand. You did well. Your testimony made the difference. What happens now? Sentencing, restitution, probably some jail time, and the civil cases can move forward. The families who lost their homes can sue for damages now that there's a criminal conviction. Will they get their homes back? Probably not, but they'll get compensation. It's not perfect, but it's something. I thanked her and walked to my truck. The afternoon sun was bright. Almost too bright after 2 days in the dim courtroom. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, letting it all sink in. Justice had been served. The people who'd tried to steal my home were going to prison. Everything had worked out exactly as it should. So why did I still feel hollow? I started the truck and drove home, to the house that was truly mine now, legally and completely. But as I pulled into the driveway and saw the empty windows staring back at me, I realized something. I'd won the battle. I'd kept my property. I'd brought criminals to justice. But I'd lost everything else that mattered. And no verdict could give that back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.